After a two-week standoff, the Senate has finally begun debate on the financial reform bill. But the bill still faces a very tough battle on the Senate floor. Lizzie O'Leary is on Capitol Hill with a senior Senate Republican who's been in the thick of the negotiations. Lizzie?
Yeah, Scarlett, I'm with Senator Gregg, who's been very much involved in all of this. Let's talk first about derivatives, because we know that this $50 billion wind down fund has sort of been set aside. That was a concession for the Democrats, brought a lot of you onto this unanimous consent motion. But derivatives, this is the big battle, is it not? What's going to happen to this Lincoln provision?
Well, I think it's the biggest battle substantively. There are other big battles like consumers. But the real core of whether we get this right or not is whether we get the derivatives right, because there are $600 trillion in notional value of derivatives out there. And if we do something that has an unintended unintended effect of contracting that market dramatically or pushing that market overseas, that would have a very negative effect on America's ability to create credit and therefore our economic vitality.
Which you think this provision to spin off a swaps dealer would?
Well, almost the entire Lincoln bill would. I mean, the Lincoln bill is extremely poorly drafted from a standpoint of making the derivatives market first safer and sounder, which is our basic goal, but second, making it a vibrant market. You know, what we want is a market where we reduce the systemic risk, where we make derivatives much more transparent, put a lot more liquidity behind them, a lot more margin, a lot more capital, and at the same time maintain America as the best place in the country to do that type of a market.
Any Republican objections then to mandatory clearing and for standardized derivatives mandatory exchange trading?
Well, on mandatory clearing, yes, there are. I would not want mandatory clearing. All instruments should not have to be cleared. There are some that
for
should
standard contracts?
For standard contracts, yes, that would have to be mandatory clearing. But there are a lot of instruments that are truly customizing, truly commercial in nature, that should be exempt from clearing. And you set up a regulatory structure to make that definitional difference. On the clearinghouses, what you want are strong clearinghouses, and you want to put as much on clearinghouses as you can, so they'll have adequate margin, adequate liquidity, and you want disclosure of what's happening, real-time disclosure to the regulators at least. Then to the extent that instruments are standardized, they should be migrated over to exchanges, and you should give the regulators the ability to look at what's happening on the clearinghouses and say, well, listen, these instruments should be on an exchange, they can be standardized, and they should be moved over there also.
Well, let me ask you.
But not a mandatory. You see the way the Lincoln bill is structured, and actually the Dodd bill for that matter. If you're a cleared instrument, you've got to be an exchange instrument. It's basically mandatory clearing and exchange. That doesn't work. The market's not ready for that yet.
Let me ask you, shifting slightly to some of the systemic risk oversight. We have seen objections to what the Federal Reserve would supervise. Tom Honig from Kansas City does not want the Fed to essentially just look at those big banks.
Right.
Who should they be regulating?
Everybody they do now. I mean, the simple fact is that the Fed needs the input of the smaller banks in the regions to have a sense of what's happening in the region, and they are a legitimate and fairly strong regulator. Granted, they've had some problems, but so is moving the smaller banks into somebody else, FDIC or OCC, is not going to necessarily give them a better regulator. The Fed can do the job, has done the job, and it can improve the job it's doing. But it really does need, I believe, that input from the smaller banks and the medium-sized banks through the bank holding company regulatory regime.
We've just got a few seconds left, but okay to keep the consumer agency within the Federal Reserve?
Well, it's more important as to what the responsibility of the consumer agency is. It should have regulatory authority subject to prudential oversight. It should not have enforcement authority, and you can put it wherever you want.
All right, Senator Gregg, thank you very much. We're out of time. Sending it back to you, Scarlett.
All right.